What's up everyone, Chris from Full Steam Designs. So I've been working on the car a bit lately. I'm actually in the process of doing the fiberglass work. But before I post the video on that, I wanted to show you guys the whole process of strip planking the body. This 4-ish minute video covers a full month of work. I'd never done anything like this in my life. To prepare, I watched a ton of canoe building videos. If you remember from the last video, I actually made these strips myself by milling down some cypress that I had. Leave a comment below with how many individual strips you think there are. Here's a little help though in case you didn't notice. All of the ones along the bottom that run the full length of the body are actually made of 2 strips that were joined together. Check out the next video to find out who guessed the closest without going over. You've probably noticed that I spent a lot of time waiting around. Generally, when someone builds a canoe, it looks like they only get a couple strips done per day. I was able to do a few more because I attached each strip to the inside structure with a pin nail. This allowed me to work much faster, especially as I went up the side of the body. I didn't need to rely on the glue between the strips holding everything together. The drawback from doing it this way is you end up with a slightly heavier body because the inner structure isn't removed. Obviously, this wouldn't work with a canoe, but it's probably better for a car. The body still ended up being pretty light. You'll see in the next video that I was able to remove it from the frame by myself. I mentioned in the last video that this project had a time limit of about 2.5 months because it was for the Rockler Hobby Challenge. In case you're wondering, I ended up winning 3rd place. I worked equally on each side until I got to the midpoint and the strips started running into each other. I trimmed off the excess and then had to individually fit each strip. It formed a really cool V pattern. The strips on the top part of the back started to turn into a real nightmare. I had considered running them from left to right instead of along the length of the body, but decided that this would have been its own headache. I kept plugging along, but stuff really started to slow down here. You notice once in a while a strip ends up on the floor. These were breaking because of how much of a curve they required. I needed to try something different, so I made a template of the curve using blue tape. This is how I made the bending jig in the last video. This was a huge help. It allowed me to steam and pre-bend a bunch of strips. They still needed a little bit of persuading to fit right, but it was much easier now. Clamping the strips as they got higher up the body got harder and harder. I tried a few different methods, but the most successful one seemed to be joining 2 or 3 clamps together in a sort of daisy chain. This allowed them to curve at the top of the body and pull the top strip towards the others. I also used a handful of shims that I could hammer between blocks that were screwed to the frame. The big orange C-clamps are helping to keep the strips flat. Instead of curving, they wanted to buckle. It seemed easier to trim the excess off each strip as I went. Eventually, I got to the point where I scored them all down the middle. Having this center rib was a huge help. This was something that I added partway through the project. I was making all of this up as I went. Looking back, I can see a lot of things that I could have done differently. But in the end, I still ended up with a product that I'm really proud of. Another thing I did to help with clamping was to drill holes in the frame that the clamps could hook into. These pivoting head match fit clamps were a huge help here. The old saying about never having too many clamps drives me nuts, but in this case, it was definitely true. The last few strips put up the biggest fight. If you look closely, you'll notice that I actually ripped them in half long ways, and then glued them in 2 separate pieces. As I rolled the car out of the garage, you can see all of the strips that I broke. Hopefully I'll have the fiberglass video ready in a week or 2. As with every other part of this project, this is something totally new to me, and isn't going without a fight. It's been a really great learning experience though. Thank you all for following along and joining me in this project. And please be sure to like, share the video, leave a comment, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Until next time, here's a few more videos that YouTube thinks you might like.